serio una intro musical.
Bueno,
¿Cuál es mi cámara?
buenas noches.
Sí.
¿Qué haces, Joseca? ¿Cómo andamos? Álvaro, buenas noches.
Buenas noches, José. ¿Qué tal?
¿Todo bien?
Cambiamos de escenario.
Sí. ¿Cómo llegamos a esto? Es lo que no sé. Estamos acá entre luces en una
Sin
esquina de... Sí, vamos a ir regulando la...
Perdón para el público presente ahí. ¿Estamos en vivo, José? Sí.
Bueno, estamos en vivo. Hay gente que estuvo esperando un ratito para que esto arranque, pero estábamos aclimatándonos acá con nuestros invitados.
Sí.
Y este es un episodio muy especial. Primero porque es el primero que hacemos de Hop. El segundo o el tercero que nos hablamos específicamente de un estilo, pero que vamos a entrevistar a los invitados especiales que vinieron hoy.
Por suerte me trajeron un traductor, ¿verdad?
Sí, igual yo creo que 2 cervezas más y nos entendemos entre todos.
Y perdón al público presente también porque cortamos la música para poder hacer este episodio, así que sepan comprender, ¿eh?
Bueno, para la gente que está mirando, nosotros estamos ahora acá en el patio de Hop. Están con nosotros 2 invitados muy especiales. La gente está allá atrás. Enseguida nos van a tirar algo. Vamos a hablar lo más
Ojalá
fuerte
que sea
claro.
cerveza.
Sí, lo más fuerte y claro que podamos, pero vamos a hacer unas cuantas preguntas a estos invitados. Y vamos a preguntarle en inglés.
Sí.
Vamos a poner después subtítulos, no se preocupen, se va a entender, no vamos a hacer preguntas muy complicadas.
¿Le presentale vos?
¿Le presento?
Sí, sí.
Bueno, arrancamos. Sorry for the introduction in Spanish. It's for the million viewers that we're having right now.
10 million, right?
Yes, and no worry, my attorney is also watching, so bienvenidos, Vic Cantwell
Thank you.
y Pete Slosberg.
Hello.
Yeah. Bienvenidos a Paraguay. Welcome to Paraguay.
Gracias.
And welcome to Cervezas por Estilo, our space dedicated to talk about beer and beer styles and beer icons like you guys. You're the first beer icons that we're having, so thanks for coming.
No, it's great to be here. It's very exciting to be in Paraguay.
You guys arrived today?
We arrived in Buenos Aires Thursday morning,
Okay.
yesterday morning.
Yesterday, yep.
And then we had a gigantic pizza with cheese last night.
Yeah.
And then got
Argentinian style pizza.
Yes,
Yeah.
and then came here this morning.
And your guys are very lucky that we don't have the regular Paraguayan weather. It's usually around 40, 42 Celsius. So it's very, very nice out there tonight.
Yeah, very pleasant. It
A
was
lot warmer.
much cooler in Buenos Aires.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cold there this morning.
Álvaro?
No escuché nada de lo que dijiste, Gabriel, pero... bueno, bienvenido Pete y Vic, ¿verdad? ¿Cuándo llegaron ellos, Chichito? Hoy llegaron a Paraguay. Ya le hicieron un tour más o menos ahí por el mercado, si ponemos el mercado,
Yeah.
¿verdad?
You went to
Yeah.
Mercado 4?
Yeah.
Yep.
How was the lunch today?
Lunch
good?
was great. We had Korean food.
Korean
it was
food?
excellent.
First food in Paraguay is Korean food.
Yeah.
What's not to like?
Yeah, Korean food in Paraguay and that area of the Mercado is very good. We heard from a lot of people from outside that I think there's a good combination between the Korean cuisine and the local beef, which is good, so it works out pretty well.
We didn't have any beef.
No?
We had kimchi soup and we had squid,
Ah, okay.
which was really good.
Because the Sunday maybe is going to be
yeah.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Asado.
barbecue.
Asado.
Yeah.
Asado.
Yeah. Pete already knows. It's asado down here.
Yeah.
In Brazil, it's churrasco. Here is asado, so it's different.
It's the same.
We're going to start with the classic, maybe dumb questions. First time in Paraguay?
Yes. I think for both of us.
First time in Paraguay.
Pete's an old hand at traveling in South America, but he's never been to Paraguay before.
Okay.
First time. We had a friend from Paraguay visit us in San Francisco, Jorge,
Yeah.
and he's been wanting me to come down. And the one time I come, he's not here.
Jorge, is Jorge Biederman?
Yeah.
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 He's
Jorge,
in Germany, I think.
Yes.
We know him around here as Tutu. And yeah, Jorge is a brewer that has a long influence here and tradition. And he told us about you, Pete, a couple of years ago, and he said, well, someday he'll come. Like you said, now that you're here, he's not here.
He left when he heard I was coming.
No, I think he's taking classes at VLB in Berlin. So
Right, that's a pretty good excuse.
it's a pretty good excuse, yeah. So, well, can I ask you guys for a little like introduction for the people, the guys that don't know about your background, if that's okay? Can we start with you, Dick?
Sure. Well, let's see. I started homebrewing in the late 80s, and a couple of years later, at the time I was living in the Boston area, but my ex-wife and I moved to Seattle. And I had gotten kind of crazy about homebrewing, mainly because my daughter had just been born, and I was taking care of her during the day while my ex-wife was working, and I was working at night. But what I had always done before was write. You know, I wrote fiction for 10 years, and, you know, lately, of course, I've written beer books. But it was because I was taking care of her that I didn't have those long stretches of time to write anymore. But I had started homebrewing, and that was something that was creative that I could do while I was taking care of her. So I threw myself into it. And then when we moved to Seattle, I took a mixed six-pack of my beers around to every brewery in town to try to get a job, because I had no professional experience, and I actually was offered 2 jobs. So I worked for 3 different breweries before I started my own, which was called Elysian Brewing in Seattle. And I ran that for almost 20 years. And by the time I stopped, well, that company sold to Anheuser-Busch InBev against my wishes, but it all worked out just fine.
Okay.
I'm not complaining anymore. But so I was done with that in about 2015, and in the interim wrote articles and some of the books and all that kind of thing. And then my girlfriend is Kim Jordan, who started New Belgium Brewing, and so she was in Colorado, I was in Seattle, and we decided to relocate to San Francisco, because it was about the same distance for both of us, and neither of us had ever lived there, and we really liked it. And of course, Pete was there. So we moved there, and for a few years we ran Magnolia Brewing, which is a brewery of long standing in San Francisco. And we're kind of wrapping that up now. We're kind of moving toward retirement, and I'm looking forward to having a one-barrel brewery in the barn that we're building on some property in western Sonoma County.
Where? Sorry?
In western Sonoma County.
Okay, Sonoma
about
County.
an hour and a half north of the city.
Okay.
So we're building a house and a barn there, and so that brewery is where I'll brew with my friends and just give the beer away. A barrel of beer is too much for us to drink. So when I have beer, I'll do what they do at the chicherias in Peru.
Okay.
I'll put a flag out on the road, and when people want free beer, they can come in and have some.
Okay, that's an excuse to visit, so we can.
Right.
Can I take a growler? So.
That's what it's for, yeah.
Okay.
Dick creo que habla un poco español también.
Sí,
¿Eh?
puedo hablar
Sí, un
poquito.
poco.
Sí.
¿Dónde
Viví en Madrid 2 años.
2 años.
En los años 80.
¡Epa!
Al pedo estuvimos hablando inglés. Entonces.
Sí. Sí. Al pedo estuvimos hablando inglés acá.
But
2 años en Madrid.
I got like crazy when you said you wrote fiction before.
Yeah, I wrote a couple of novels. I never published any of my fiction.
You have any plans to publish them sometime?
Not those. I wrote a couple of novels that one of them I'm fairly proud of, but I don't think that's really what I'm thinking. But these days, I'm actually trying to write fiction again.
Okay.
I think I've written enough beer books. So I've written 4.
Can you tell us about, for the people that don't know, about the beer books that you...
Right. Well, in 97, I think, I wrote with Fal Allen, our friend who runs the brewery at Anderson Valley, the barley wine style book for Brewers Publications. And then the next one that I did was in about 2012-ish. I wrote the Brewers Association Guide to Starting Your Own Brewery. And then a couple years later, I co-authored with Peter Buchart, the brewmaster from New Belgium, Wood and Beer. That was an interesting project, too, because he was really the expert. He worked at Rodenbach as the brewmaster for so many years, and then he worked at New Belgium for so many years. And he knows so much about aging beer in wood. And so it was an interesting project because he gave me a lot of his notes, much of which was in Flemish, and it was my job to turn a lot of the stuff that he had already written down and that we shared in conversation into reasonably coherent English prose. And it was really fun. I learned a lot. We had a great trip in France to various cooperages to see how they were making the barrels there. We went to Kentucky, visited the cooperages there where they make the bourbon barrels and all that. We had a few other trips too. It was a great project. That was fun. And then a couple years later, I wrote the Eclectic IPA book about using unusual ingredients to make IPA, because so often people will say to me, what's your favorite style? And really, IPA is my favorite style. And they'll say, well, what's going to happen after IPA? And I will say, there is no after IPA. There's just different variations of it.
Yeah.
So that's what that book is about, is using fruits and vegetables and herbs and spices, coffee, chocolate, whatever, to enhance the flavors already existing in IPA with the different hop flavors and fruity flavors tying into the fruity flavors in hops and that kind of thing, and building beers that way.
So IPA is like rock and roll. There's nothing after.
Right. They're just different kinds of
Yeah.
Porque era la pregunta que yo le iba a hacer, ¿verdad? ¿Cuál era su estilo favorito de birra? Ya dijo ya.
IPA.
IPA.
Yeah.
No hay nada después de la IPA. Según él, ¿no?
And we're, I think, a month away from IPA Day, IPA Week. So it's...
here?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I think it's worldwide. The first Thursday of August, something like that.
Is that right?
Yeah. Yep.
Well, I didn't even know that.
I think that's a thing. We're learning it, so this is a very new market.
They have
so.
a big IPA festival on IPA Day in Brazil.
Yeah.
And
yes, they have
Puerto.
IPA Day. Yeah. So, well, thanks, Dick, again for visiting our country and for sharing some time with us tonight. And Pete, welcome.
Thank you. Dick said it all. I'm not sure what I can add to
I
it.
wasn't talking about you, though.
I heard you're spent. No. No, Dick's a young guy. I got involved with beer, at least home brewing, a little bit earlier. Turns out I never liked beer. I went to university in the 1970s. You only had mass-produced beer, which I didn't like. Then I met my wife, and she drove me to drink. But I got into wine first. And we moved to California in 1979, and I actually wanted to learn how to make wine at home. So I got 100 kilos of Cabernet Sauvignon grapes. We squeezed it, we fermented it, we bottled it. Then I realized I have to wait a couple years before I can drink it. I didn't want to wait. So the home winemaking store I went back and said, okay, I did the red wine, now I have to wait, but it's too long, what do I do? And they said you can make white wine in a year. I thought, that's better, but still a long time. Then he said you can make beer at home in a month. And I said, I love the fact of a month, but I hate beer. And he said, have you had a home brew before? And I said, no. And he said, I guarantee you'll like it. So I did a home brew, and I couldn't believe it. It was probably a really shitty home brew, but it tasted so much better to me than commercial beers. And I made a couple more brews, and it took about 6 months before I figured out there was a flavor in home brew that was missing from commercial beers, and that's the flavor of malt. When you're home brewing, it's 100% malt. And as a kid, we have candies in the U.S. called malted milk balls.
Oh.
It's crunchy malt in the center, surrounded by usually crappy chocolate, but chocolate on the outside. That was my favorite candy as a kid. And when I could taste the flavor of the malt that I had in the candy, in the beer, I thought this is pretty good. So I started home brewing and started a home brew club at the Silicon Valley company I worked at. And then a friend of mine said, why are we working for other companies? Let's start our own company. But at that point I was working for IBM, the computer company, and I liked what I was doing, and I said, I don't know anything about starting a company. I like my job. Why would I do something different that I don't know? And I put him off for several years. And then after a couple of years, I said, okay, let's talk about the company, if we're going to start a company, but not talk about the product. Beer was never part of it. And we came up with 3 goals of the company, and after we came up with the 3, that got me excited. And the 3 goals were, we wanted to make a world-class product, gold medal winning product. We wanted to get into a new industry, not an old industry with a lot of competitors. We didn't know what it was going to be. And the third was what really got me excited. Our third goal was saying we will treat the product with reverence, but everything else with irreverence. If you know what reverence and irreverence are. And when I thought about it, I thought, if we're going to put a lot of time into a company, that's fine, but let's have fun with whatever we do. So that became the core when we talked more, and we talked about getting into, it wasn't even called craft beer then, it was called micro beer. And there were maybe 20 other microbreweries. And we started talking about this in 1985 and then started our beer company in 1986. And the whole goal was to make great beer, but make some noise, show some humor, have some attitude, and say, fuck it, let's enjoy what we're doing. So I created a beer. It was the first American brown ale. So if you know the category, American brown ale, you can thank me for Pete's Wicked Ale. That started that. But we had a lot of fun. Everything we did, we tried to put some fun aspect in it, and we grew pretty big. We became number 2 in the country behind Sam Adams. We got up to 500,000 hectoliters in our 10th year. That's a lot of beer. Yeah. After our 10th year, we went public on the stock exchange in New York, and 3 years later we were acquired by a company in Texas, a company called Gambrinus. Okay. They own Shiner, if you've heard of Shiner Bock.
Yeah.
They own Bridgeport in Oregon and Trumer in Berkeley, California. Then I had to spend 2 years with them, but after that I was free, yippee! And I became a good friend of Pierre Celis. Pierre Celis was the gentleman who started Hoegaarden. He resurrected the wit beer style. And he kept telling me, come to Belgium, I'll show you around. And how can you turn down a world famous brewer for giving a tour? But I was too busy, I couldn't go until after we sold the company, and I spent 2 years with the new company. But I finally went over in the year 2000, learned more about beer, but I discovered chocolate. And I couldn't believe how good European chocolate was compared to the crap we had in the US. So I wondered why and researched it and found out why. People would say the quality of the cocoa beans that the Europeans get is better than what American chocolate companies can get. And it's not that. It's the fact that government regulation requires more pure chocolate in European chocolate than in the US. For example, dark chocolate, in Europe it has to have a minimum of 35% real chocolate. In the US it's only 15%.
Oh.
So by putting more of the good stuff in, you get more flavor.
Yeah.
And that reminded me of why I hated beer going to college, because it was all adjuncts in the commercial beers. Then when you did a homebrew with 100% barley, it changed. So there was a new movement starting around, a craft chocolate movement. So I thought, why not get involved early on in the craft chocolate business? But again, trying to get a product that's world class, but with humor, with everything. So we were doing high quality chocolate from a different perspective. It's good for everybody. Eat it yourself, have fun with it. And we ended up selling that company after 7 years. And after that, this kind of changed our life yet another time. We wanted to go somewhere to study Spanish. Sadly for me, unsuccessfully. But we rented an apartment in Buenos Aires for 4 months and went to Spanish school. And while I was there, I got involved with a home brew club called Cerveceros Caseros.
Okay.
and met some of the professional brewers there. And I'd go to visit them, and the beers weren't very good. The quality of the ingredients, the quality of the equipment, it just was very low. So I'd ask the brewers, well, are you working together to show improvement? And they would say, no, the other brewer, Jose, down the street, he's my enemy. They said, no. You guys have to work together and share information. They weren't doing that. So I talked to a couple beer people I met in Buenos Aires. Martin Boan, he was part of Cerveceros Caseros. And then I met Leo Ferrari, he started on Terry's.
Yeah.
And I talked to them and I said, you know, guys, the only way you're going to grow craft beer in Argentina is to share information. So I suggested we hold a conference, and I came back a year later and we had a conference that about 90 home brewers came to, and in the beginning, nobody would say hi to one another. And after the conference, everybody was hugging and kissing, and we were trying to get people to work together, share information. And after that conference, Leo and Martin and I started something called the South Beer Cup about 12 years ago. And that was a conference for all of South America to share information, but also have a competition to give feedback to the brewers on how to improve their beers. So it's kind of fun to be involved with South American brewing for 12 years now, and seeing how each country has started at different time frames and accelerated at different rates. But it's so good to see the quality of the beer all around South America really rising.
Yes, and
that's a long story.
No. But it's a very good story.
No, it's okay. And are you still working with chocolate or not anymore?
At home, I make chocolate at home.
Yeah.
And one of the crazy things I've been doing with chocolate is with brewers. When brewers make beer with cacao, cocoa nibs, I tell them, don't throw the cocoa nibs out after you have them in the fermenter. Give them to me. And I wash them and dry them, and I make chocolate from the spent nibs, and the flavor of the beer is in the cocoa nibs.
Yeah?
So it's beer-flavored chocolate.
Qué loco.
That's something that we need to try.
Sí, tenemos que aprender a hacer chocolate,
Claro, de cacao usado, o sea, chocolate de cacao usado previamente en cerveza.
Para hacer la cerveza, ¿verdad? Que pasa por un proceso de secado otra vez, dice que seca.
Tenemos que probar. But just going back to what you said about being involved with this development of craft beer going back to what you say about being involved with the development and the growing of the craft beer scene in South America, that involves probably also Brazil, Chile, Uruguay.
Peru, Uruguay, Argentina,
Ecuador.
And now Colombia.
And our scene is probably, the latest one, jumping into the train, because we do have breweries like Sajonia, with Jorge Biederman is involved, and he's been to the South Beer Cup, I think was 2014 or something.
Yeah.
He won a medal with
Right.
the Pale Ale.
Yeah.
So that was probably way before its time for the brewing scene here. And now we have some other breweries having some medals and competitions outside, but we're still very, very young. This is probably
one suggestion I've given to other countries, and if you want to grow your industry here, it's not just by having more breweries and better beer. You have to educate distributors, you have to educate retailers, bar owners, restaurant owners, you have to educate the public. And one of the things I found in the early 90s, I would travel around the US, and our distributors would say, go to this restaurant and this bar to say thank you for selling Pete's Wicked Ale. And I'd go in, not saying who I was, and ask, what beers do you have? And they would mention Budweiser, Miller, and Coors, but not our beer. And it was frustrating because I was told to go there because they sold our beer. And I like having fun with people, so when they say Bud, Miller, and Coors, I would say, don't you have anything with color, taste, or aroma? And they'd laugh. And then they'd say Sam Adams, Sierra Nevada, Pete's. And then I'd say, why don't you mention it? And they didn't mention it because they were afraid if they mentioned Pete's Wicked Ale, the customer wouldn't know what it was. And they'd say, I never heard of it. What does it taste like? Well, you don't have to describe Pilsner here, right? And everybody, there's no flavor to it. You don't have to describe Budweiser. But with craft beer, you have to describe it. So I created a beer education chart. You can find it online. Look for Pete's Landscape of Beers.
Okay.
And with Pete's Landscape of Beers, I can make anybody a beer expert in under 10 minutes. So part of what we wanted to do with our company was not only grow our company, but to grow the craft beer movement. So the chart I created had everybody's beer on it, not to say that one was better than the other, but what makes the beers different and why do you want to try certain beers? So the biggest suggestion I have for you guys is you have to get some creative education to educate the people of Paraguay to want to try it.
Yeah.
Y ese es el trabajo de la Cerva ahora mismo,
Sí.
¿verdad? Que a través de la Cerva estamos haciendo. Bueno.
Bueno, a través de la Cerva y cada uno desde su cervecería o de su espacio. Hay gente que lo hace a través de sus redes sociales.
Claro, y de donde podamos también, ¿verdad?
Claro,
Sí.
pero es importante, después obviamente va a salir todo esto con subtítulos, pero estaba hablando
Sí.
Pete de la importancia de la educación, ¿verdad?
Claro, claro.
Para que la gente entienda.
Que dijo que para que el mundo craft, que la cerveza artesanal mejore en Paraguay, no es necesario que se abran más cervecerías, ¿verdad? Entonces, sino que educar a la gente y que cada uno que cada uno hace eso a través del canal que tiene disponible, ¿verdad? Para ir avanzando un poquitito nomás, ¿verdad? Más rápido. Ellos van a estar en el evento mañana de la Cerva, ¿verdad? Chichito, van a estar ellos mañana en el evento presente, ¿sí? Mañana van a estar presentes en el evento
El Beer and Music Fest.
Cerva Beer Music Fest, que va a estar en la Gran 7. A ver, hay una birra colaborativa.
Sí, hay una cerveza que se hizo en colaboración con tanto Pete como Dick, estuvieron involucrados en la receta a través de unos intercambios de correos y sugerencias. Esa cerveza se cocinó aquí en The Hop y va a estar disponible mañana para que la gente pueda probar, ¿verdad? La primera versión, y después ahora que ellos están por acá, van a sugerir que otros ingredientes locales agregar para hacer una segunda versión.
Ajá.
We're basically talking about the beer that was brewed for this festival, that in collaboration with you guys, the suggestions through the emails, that we're going to have the plain version tomorrow on tap at the festival. Then we're going to probably hear some suggestions about adding Palo Santo wood or cocoa nibs or coffee or whatever you guys think that could work with the beer. And that's going to come out later, so that people can try it tomorrow, like the standard version.
How many liters of the beer did you make?
500. Yeah. I think it's enough for tomorrow.
That's a good amount. Yeah.
Yeah, it was brewed here at our brewery at the Hub. We have a 5-barrel system, basically. So, yeah.
And that's a good idea. There's so much you can do post-production to flavor the beer. You mentioned Palo Santo, which will give a really interesting flavor, and any number of other things, any other number of treatments that you can do.
Yes, and we want to, see what local products we can blend in with that beer to see how it works. It will be fun. We'll have to try it and drink it, and
Yeah.
No sé si arrancamos una pregunta del público. Presidente, ¿arrancamos alguna
you need a
pregunta
picture
con el
of
público
Pope
presente
Francis
o...?
blessing the Palo Santo going into the beer.
yes, or you can guys bless the Palo Santo, and we can send it to Pope Francis later.
Yeah, there's something kind of Franciscan about you.
Because Argentina, as far as I know, doesn't have Palo Santo, so we're gonna... Pope Francis visited us, I think, 4 years ago or something. We didn't have time to give him some Palo Santo. Which, according to a friend, since it's probably translation would be Hollywood. It has something to do with the Hollywood Hills in California.
Según la teoría de Fito.
That's
Sí.
some French
Some
theory.
French theory. Yeah.
We don't know if that's true.
Hollywood, Palo Santo.
I get it.
¿Eh?
Yeah.
It makes
Makes
sense,
sense?
I think. At least sounds funny.
Sí, es un fan.
Pregunta del público. Aprovechamos. Hay un público presente acá. Primera vez que hacemos
Sí.
una. Ahí está.
Ahí está el público presente. Presidente. Presidente, queremos saber si alguien tiene alguna pregunta acá para los presentes. Tenemos traductor disponible. Podemos hacer un switch acá, un hot swap.
So we're gonna start with a quick like Q&A session. So
Sure.
Fernando Aguayo is the official translator for the Acerva. Speaks not only English but Russian also.
Hello, good evening. With the current situation that the world is going on right now, how do you see the future of beer industry? What do you think will happen from now on?
It is a complicated question. I
Es una
mean,
pregunta muy complicada.
we've been bombarded by so much. I mean, first of
Ya
all, I mean,
muchas cosas
in the U.S.,
fuimos
you know,
bombardeados.
when Pete talked about
Cuando
when he
Pete
started
habló
his
de
brewery, there were only
Que cuando empezaron
how many-
su
I mean,
cervecería, había
yeah,
algo
there were
como
only maybe 20 craft brands.
20
back
marcas
then,
artesanales.
and now there are several thousand
Y
in the US.
ahora
so
hay
the
casi
competition
miles,
is very,
unas cuantas de
very
miles.
stiff. But then we had COVID.
Después vino
and
el
so
COVID
as many as have been able to hang on, have
y
been
algunas
able to
cervecerías están luchando para mantenerse
other
ahí.
crises like,
Y hay una crisis
shortages of
económica.
raw materials
Eh,
and that kind of stuff.
de conseguir
I would
los
say, though,
insumos.
that, one thing that we absolutely have to make sure of
Y tenemos que
as craft
estar
beer
seguros de que
producers
la cerveza
is that the
artesanal
beer be of very high quality.
tiene que ser siempre de una
Because one of the
cualidad
challenges
alta
that craft beer has
de
had
buena
since the
calidad.
very beginning,
y
and
como
I know you
existió
have
desde
that
el
here,
comienzo.
is convincing people to spend
Está
extra
convenciendo
money
a la gente
on
a
beer that has
gastar
more flavor
dinero
and
extra
costs more to make. And
y
if
que
it
se pueda
doesn't taste
hacer.
good, if quality hasn't been paid close enough attention to, then
Si la
why should
de
people
calidad de la
continue to
cerveza es
buy it?
constante,
Why should they follow it? So the beer
entonces
really
se va a
has to be
comprar.
good.
Si no,
The
¿por
beer
qué seguir
really
pagando
has to
ese
be,
precio?
of very high quality, so that people are rewarded.
Entonces la
for the
calidad tiene que
expense that
ser
they've
bastante
undertaken and the
alta
experience that
para que
they've
la gente
decided to
tenga que
try.
pagar eso y tenga que tener el producto
I think that's
que se
one of the
merece.
most important things.
Y eso es lo más importante en este sentido. Thank you. So he would like to know, we have East Coast IPA, we have West Coast IPA, so what is the next IPA?
Well, Dick's the IPA guy, but for me, being the
Pete
old
dice, él es
guy,
el hombre de la IPA.
I was aware and lived through
Yo
the
siempre
West Coast
supe
IPA trend. But West Coast
de
IPAs
el
in the
estilo
last
West
2 or
Coast
3
IPA.
years have
Hubo por
changed
muchos
completely.
años y también ha cambiado todos estos años. Ya no es algo que empezó hace 15, 20 años atrás. Ha ido a una dirección que ha sido muy clara, no colores ámbar, bien seca, no hay dulzor. Y el lupulado está más balanceado que poner una cantidad loca de lúpulos. La West Coast IPA moderna me recuerda a un estilo que hace unos años no parecía. Era dorada, seca y balanceada. Eso era la West Coast IPA en mi época.
What I find myself really liking these days
Lo que me gusta hoy en día son las cervezas híbridas. Eso es lo que funciona para mí.
The really sort of knock your socks off East Coast
En serio,
IPA
te saca de tus medias.
in its worst form has almost no carbonation.
Casi no
It's thick
tiene
on the
carbonatación.
palate, is overly sweet
Es
in effect,
dulce al
very
paladar,
heavy, not
muy
really drinkable,
pesado, no tan
really doesn't
tomable.
invite you to take that next sip. I think an
Y
IPA
te
has
invita
to
a
have
tomar otro
bitterness.
Y las
And
IPAs que tienen
it,
esto
it should have carbonation.
tienen que tener
Cloudy is
carbonatación.
fine, and I think some of the attributes of hopping
Pero
and some of the cloudiness,
también puede ser bien
borrowing from the
lupuladas
East
o
Coast
turbias.
IPA, can be really delicious. But I
Esta
think
clase
as
de
long as it's
IPAs son muy
properly
deliciosas.
carbonated to engage you and refresh you, and,
Y-
and properly bitter,
Y tienen que ser
that's what's ideal
propiamente
for me.
lupuladas
So,
y amargas
I
y
think we're gonna
tienen que
see those two
refrescar.
styles kinda
Y creo
go
que
together
esos dos
as the
estilos
extremes
van
are
a
fall away.
mezclarse y seguir ahí en más. He would like to know in easy terms what is the difference between hazy IPA and juicy IPA.
Well, I think,
Creo
juicy
que
is
cuando
really
es
talking
juicy
about hops.
está hablando de los lúpulos,
Because,
porque
starting with the development of
empezando
Cascade
con
hops way back
el
in the
desarrollo de
60s,
los lúpulos
all of a
Cascade en los
sudden
60,
hops that were
de
reminiscent
repente
of
todos los
oranges
lúpulos
and grapefruit,
tienen reminiscencia a
cherries,
naranja,
eucalyptus,
cereza,
whatever else
hierba,
came on the
pino,
scene, and
y
things
todos estos lúpulos vinieron ahora a la cena
and of other,
y tienen otro,
sort of edible things.
tiene cosas que se
One thing
pueden
that we've learned
probar,
a lot
comer.
about in the last several years is terpenes. In
Los
the US,
terpenos
if you
también
talk to somebody
aparecieron.
about terpenes, they think you're talking about
Sí,
marijuana.
estamos hablando
But the
de
fact
terpenos,
is
hablamos de
that
marihuana.
terpenes exist in nearly all organic
Y,
compounds.
y existen
And
casi todos
you
los
look at the
compuestos
terpene
orgánicos del lúpulo.
analyses of hops,
Cuando uno
and
hace
you'll
los
learn
análisis
the
del lúpulo,
story of what sorts of evocative flavors there are. That's where
hay
juicy
muchos
lives. Hazy,
sabores
of course,
que,
is just descriptive.
y hazy es solamente
just has to
descriptivo.
do with how a beer looks.
Es como luce la
I
cerveza.
was a Northwest brewer. I had
Yo
nothing
era un
against a
cervecero
hazy
del
beer.
noreste.
If anything, bright beers in the Northwest, especially in Oregon, were mistrusted.
En Oregon es especialmente
the man
especial
makes
tener una
great beer.
cerveza
But,
claras.
if you don't filter your beer, it's going
Si
to
no
be
filtras tu
somewhat hazy.
cerveza,
I think
va a
hazy
ser
is fine.
hazy, turbia.
But I can't resist quoting a friend of ours,
Pero no
Sal
puedo
Allen,
resistir
with whom I wrote the
citar a
Barley
un amigo de
Wine book.
nosotros.
What he says
Lo que él
is
dice
that
es,
no matter how delicious a
no
beer is
importa
that's
qué tan
hazy,
deliciosa
it
sea
would
tu
be better
cerveza.
if it were bright.
Va a ser mejor. ¿Qué una? Estaría mejor si fuese menos turbia, claro. I think this question you answered, but they would like to know what is each of you favorite style of beer or beer style.
I think you already know mine.
Para Dick, creo que ya sabemos que es la IPA.
I
Pete?
didn't make this term up, but I'm a believer in it. I mentioned I like malt, so I like beer flavored beer.
Beer flavored beer. Pete dice que le gusta la cerveza con sabor a cerveza.
Yeah. He said if you would write down a West Coast IPA recipe for him.
Sure. I could write 30 of them.
Puedo escribir 30 recetas.
And when I put together the recipes for the IPA book, the
Cuando
Eclectic
hago la
IPA
receta
book,
de IPAs,
to be perfectly honest, I
Para ser
still
sincero,
haven't brewed all of them.
tengo
And my
que hacerlo
girlfriend said,
todo.
can you do that? Can you put a recipe in a book that you haven't brewed? And over the years, like especially in
Mi novia me
Magnolia,
dice, ¿puedes
I
hacer
did
eso? ¿Puedes
brew
poner
nearly
una
all of them.
receta en el libro igual si no la haces?
But,
Y he hecho eso
I can
durante los
put
años.
together recipes.
Pero también hago eso.
So, una pregunta mía, ¿verdad? You answer in very simple terms everything we ask, but I still want to kind of like push a little bit more. There's New England IPA. There was a little bit of this cold IPA thing that I don't know if it actually happened or not. Do you think that probably the trend goes to the in-between, like West Coast, East Coast, something? What else do you see like a development in the future for hoppy beers? It goes because hops are, I don't think how further they can go with the flavors, with the notes that they can, like we can extract from hops. Maybe yeast will help. Maybe somewhere around there.
Well, it's tempting to talk about some of the genetic manipulation. There's a really interesting project going on in Berkeley right now called the Berkeley Beer Project. You've probably met those guys.
I've heard of it.
Yeah, but what they're doing is DNA manipulation using CRISPR technology, which I think is really fascinating. And I know it raises, the hairs on people's necks at times because it's genetic manipulation. But, it's possible to engineer yeasts that can synthesize hop effects and fruit effects, can minimize diacetyl and that kind of thing. And I'm not saying there's a substitute for using the actual ingredients, but I think there are many tools that are becoming available to us that we aren't even aware of yet. And I'm eager to go brew some beer with those guys. One of my former brewers at Magnolia now works there as their experimental brewer. But I don't know, you say that just about everything has been explored in hops, but one might have said that 20 years ago, before there was such a thing as Amarillo and Citra and Simcoe and all the hops that we're very familiar with now. And there will be new ones, and there will be new combinations. So, I don't know. I was always amazed that over the 25 or so years that I was a professional brewer that I didn't seem to really run out of ideas. And, that day could come, but there will always be new ideas.
You think in the future we can custom order our yeast strain and say, I want this diacetyl free and this hazy one or something like that? It can be genetically engineered for your needs.
You're still going to have to do the work.
Yeah, probably.
And as Pete says, anybody can make beer, but it takes some talent to make really good beer.
Some effort.
Sí, acabaron las preguntas, me dijo, hicimos un hot swap acá.
Well, people's kind of shy, so they're not throwing a lot of questions. I have maybe general question that I think probably Pete can elaborate, but
throw them at us. Just throw them at us.
I mean, we're, like I said a couple minutes ago, this is probably preschool of craft beer in our country. We're mostly young brewers, people that started brewing 5, 7, 3, 2 years ago. And everything is very new. We're understanding styles and everything. But that's one thing, like you said, making beer. The other part, selling the beer, making the customer understand, like you said, that they are paying more for a product that they don't see the value yet. And how do we make that happen? Probably that's I think that's the most difficult part of entering this whole scene, because brewing the beer, you get to a point that you understand how it works. You need the best ingredients, you need the effort, you need the work. But the other side, the marketing side, the selling side, is there any tips, any ideas, any suggestions that you can plant the seed and leave it here and come back in a couple of years and see, hey, this tree grew up a little bit?
Number one, I like to say when you're talking to consumers or distributors or bar owners, talk like a 12-year-old. Talk as if you're talking to a 12-year-old. Don't use complicated terms. It destroys the conversation. Use simple descriptors of the beer. Is it bread-like? Is it nutty? Is it roasted? Don't use 20 words. Simplify in order to make it intriguing for people to want to try it. The other thing I like, it makes more sense if you see my chart. The industrial beers are in the middle, then you go out to all the styles around it. And if you try to get a Pilsner drinker to try a craft beer, take a baby step. Don't recommend an IPA. Don't recommend a Doble IPA.
Or sour.
Or sour. Recommend beers that are a short step away to make sure they like it. If you get them to go too far, they'll never pay extra money to have something they think they're not going to like. So make that first experience enjoyable.
Yeah. Muy claro.
Sí, clarísimo.
¿Alguna otra?
Decías. No,
More
preguntas,
beer?
creo que ya no hay más en el público.
Yeah, la que vos sugieras.
I
have the IPA. I'll have something else.
Ya tomó la IPA.
Not yet.
One other thing I highly recommend, and that is to generate interest. A lot of the major cities in the U.S. have what they call Beer Week. In San Francisco, it's traditionally been in February because it's cold and rainy and nobody drinks a lot of beer then. So during that week, San Francisco will have up to 800 events. It could be a tap takeover, it could be Meet the Brewer, it could be a dinner, it could be anything. But you can get the word out to the general public that during Asuncion Beer Week, you were going to have 20 events, 30 events, and it'll be slow in the beginning, the first year, but try to make progress and find out what type of events work. I do a beer and chocolate event. I pair beer and chocolates on Valentine's Day, and it sells out every year.
And it doesn't have to be just at breweries. You know, you enlist the retailers, you enlist restaurants and other places to have events. I think that's a very good idea about furthering beer culture. Because one thing you probably heard in both of our stories is that at a certain point, we just became passionate about having been exposed to beer, and you know, we ended up making it, but we started out by really enjoying drinking it. And the more you learn, the more that happens. So I think fostering some sort of a beer week, even if it starts very slowly, is a really good idea.
I also recommend, if possible, if there are cooking schools where people go to learn how to become a chef, get involved, offer to do beer training classes in cooking schools. So maybe not that year or the year after, but when these young chefs are out in the world at restaurants, they'll think more about having beer with the food than wine with the food.
Yeah, because the processes of making beer have a lot more to do with the processes of making food than making wine does.
Yeah. That's something very interesting. ¿Y le trajiste nomás la doble IPA?
Sí, le dijo que sí.
Ah, bueno.
Es la 9, le dijo. Okay, we will working on that. And talking here with the president. And Asunción Fashion Beer Cafe. Está allá.
Claro, muchos eventos, ¿cierto? O sea, importante es lo que nos están diciendo. Yo quiero agregar o preguntar algo más. It takes time, right? I mean, for us to, it's like, I'm asking like on the, maybe not younger, but unexperienced side of it, because we sometimes get desperate, like people are not getting what we're trying to do or what we're trying to say. And
One other thing I highly recommend, not just training chefs, but training the government. We made an effort in California to make appointments with politicians, including the governor of California. I offered to go out on a Friday afternoon to do a beer tasting, and I couldn't believe it. The governor had us out to talk about beer education, and it's one step to have politicians know, number one, know that you exist, know that you're employing people, so as an industry you're keeping people at work, you have a new type of product that...
And generating tax revenue.
Yeah. Yes.
So if you have a mayor of Asuncion or a governor of the state or even the president, see if you can have an audience. And you don't want to be selling beer, you just want to say, we want to educate you that we have a new movement, new business movement. We'd love to give you some samples and just explain what's happening. The sooner you get government officials aware of what you're doing, then they might treat you with respect.
Yes, and like you said, get to know that we exist. I mean, that they can like become aware that we exist as an industry, as small as we can be, but to know that we exist.
If you have a beer festival, there's a beer festival tomorrow.
Yeah.
Tomorrow, yeah.
Invite them.
You can't do it this year, but next year, invite the mayor of Asuncion to tap the first keg.
Yeah, you're right.
I mean, he'll be looking for votes.
Yeah.
And
And like exposure and like.
Yeah. And beer isn't political.
Yes.
I mean, even in our country, as divided it is these days, it's generally beer is something that legislators can agree on.
Okay. ¿Algo más?
No sé, ahí afuera creo que ya no hay ninguna pregunta.
So
Ellos
when
tienen
you
sus
have-
libros acá.
not only your competition, national competition, but if you have a national beer conference with the competition, it's good to get experts like him, not me, but experts like him. But I would, I volunteer with a government agency in the U.S. That gives free advice to small businesses, not just breweries, but any kind of small business. And I created a class on guerrilla marketing. Have you heard the term guerrilla?
Yes.
So it's guerrilla marketing is how to get the word out without spending money. And the more you can get a brewer to think about not just making the beer, but how to be creative in getting other people to get the word out, that'll help grow the industry.
Excellent. I mean, thank you. Thank you, guys. And, ¿más preguntas? No, está todo muy tímido. Bueno, también realmente hay que aclarar que no se escucha mucho más acá, o sea, más allá de lo que estamos acá, ¿verdad? Así que nosotros mismos estamos con micrófono y allá no hay retorno, pero...
Si se quieren ir a la cancha.
You guys want to watch a game tomorrow, a soccer game?
Oh, yeah.
No,
Yeah.
a football game. I don't know what soccer is.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you for...
Soccer.
Just a quick note, be advised, the teams that are playing are not very good.
But what color should we wear?
No worries, you'll get your shirt tomorrow. You'll get your...
Okay.
Yes.
Try to bring you to my team.
Bueno, hay una lucha acá de
equipo.
clubes, parece. ¿eh?
Guerrilla Marketing 101.
Okay.
When you have a beer event, make sure with all your contacts, you reach out to journalists who write about food, who write about wine, maybe write about beer, but invite the journalists to the festival and walk them around to talk to all the brewers. Then they'll write about what you're doing. And that doesn't cost you anything.
Yes. And people like free drinks and being around events. So
And brewers are generally pretty interesting people. One thing I think is really interesting about our movement is Pete talked about how he worked in tech. I was writing and working in restaurants to support that. Most of us did something else first. So we didn't all go to the same schools. We didn't all have the same experiences the way so many fields are. We all did different things. And when you talk to people, you learn a lot about photography or marketing or tech or something.
they all have like an interesting background story that makes, like you said, inserts interesting people. I mean,
Yeah.
Beer people are usually very nice and like interesting. Usually, most of the time. Sometimes we get a little bit maybe grumpy after a couple of beers.
Sometimes.
Creo que ya estamos, no sé, ya nos vamos despidiendo para no hacer más largo. También ellos tienen que descansar, llegaron hoy, le llevaron al mercado, se fueron a comer, le llevaron de paseo, le trajeron otra vez de acá.
Por mí le pregunto hasta las 5 de la mañana cosas, pero una más.
Es lo que tomaron hasta ahora.
Qué difícil eso. Last question from President Francisco is, among all the beer you tried so far, which... no, espera, no era la... Espera que me confundí de pregunta. Hay que cortarlo. ¿Qué le pareció? ¿Qué le pareció? I mean, what do you think about the beers you had so far? I mean, the local beers.
We've been to 2 breweries today, and across the board, we have an English term. I don't know if you need to translate it, but we have a term. It's called fucking amazing.
Okay.
The quality of the beers here, the 2 breweries, are fucking amazing.
Okay.
Yeah, Francisco asked us to tell him about any of the flaws that we were picking up in his beers. There were no flaws.
Okay.
The beers were very, very well made, and the beers I've had tonight have also been very well made. I'm sure there's bad beer out there, but we haven't had it yet.
And you're probably just being very nice with us.
No,
so.
we're not. You know, we've been in this business a long time, and what I was saying about quality before, it's important to tell somebody what you really think about their beer.
Yeah.
And we're not just bullshitting you.
Thank you. Allá para la cámara, invitación para
Sí,
mañana.
no, y bueno, ¿esto está en vivo?
Sí,
No era
seguimos.
grabado nomás.
No, este en vivo.
Avisana, ¿eh?
Y
Y
vamos a sortear.
tenemos ahí gente que está viendo, José K. Vamos a sortear una entrada.
Gente,
Dos
nosotros
entradas.
no vimos los
Un par de
comentarios, no
entradas.
vimos nada, estamos sin monitor, así
Un
que
ganador, dos
¿hay
entradas.
comentarios, José K?
¿Cuál va a ser la consigna? ¿No está viendo nadie? Bueno. ¿Y cuál va a ser la consigna? La consigna. Vamos a sortear 2 entradas para mañana.
El que, no sé, el que escribe primero.
Bueno, ya
Ahí
está.
está.
Palabra del presidente. El primero que escriba en comentario, quiero las entradas, gana. Dale, José, decime. No, ella no. Otra. Mentira, no le conozco. Bueno.
Ya está.
¿Cómo
Una,
retira eso, presidente?
otra. ¿Cómo va a
Ya
darle
me
mal
decís que
ejército?
Lorena Gavilán ganó.
Que ponga su nombre.
Lorena Gavilán, José K. No, pero ya está. Un sorteo, 2 entradas. Ganó Lorena, 2 entradas. Mañana directo
bueno,
se
ya
acerca
está.
a la caja. Ya está. Tiene 2 entradas Lorena mañana entonces. Se acerca a la caja Lorena Gavilán, 2 entradas. Que pase su número de cédula o no sé cómo hacemos. Su número de cédula ahí.
No, escribe el Instagram de la Cerva, @CervaPI y ya
Ahí está.
ya confirma todo.
En el Instagram de la Cerva.
Bueno, mañana Beer and Music Fest de la Cerva.
Empieza a las 3.
Empieza a las 15 horas. Termina cuando termine. En el Club Emiliano R. Fernández de Asunción, zona de identificaciones, creo que todos conocen, si no, googleen. Tickets todavía a la venta. Mañana en Puerta.
En Puerta también.
También en
Sí, en Puerta también.
IPI o en Puerta. Muchas entradas vendidas ya. ¿Podemos decir cuántas? Más de 500 entradas vendidas, así que...
O sea, 30 expositores de cerveza, más de 3.000 litros de birra artesanal de todos los estilos, food trucks. Muchos caseros vuelven, grupos de la Gran Pistola. Impresionante va a estar.
Bueno, nuestros 2 invitados acá de lujo que
y ellos van a estar
cubriendo con los
presentes.
detalles del evento.
Los 2 invitados que estuvieron acá con nosotros
Como
hoy
para que
mañana
le
van a
puedan
estar recorriendo
preguntar-
todo el evento.
Para que le puedan preguntar. También hay una votación popular de las... ¿Qué es? ¿De las cervezas?
Se va a entregar un pasaporte cervecero a la entrada que tiene un código QR, ahí escaneas, ahí vas a poder votar, ¿verdad? Y en ese pasaporte también te van a sellar las cervecerías para y el que toma toda la cerveza de todos los estados, una foto con Pete.
Una foto con Pete y Dick. Espectacular.
Cerramos.
Sorteamos chuleamos un capítulo más.
El capítulo más corto que hicimos hasta ahora.
Sí, pero para mí el más tenso, muy difícil acá con
Sí.
2 pesos pesados, íconos. No dimensionamos nomás probablemente todos nosotros que estamos hablando.
Se me
con
complica,
dos.
Joseca, arreglame este tema que no tenemos retorno, papá. Se me complica todo acá.
No, tranqui. De vuelta, gracias a Joseca y Pinoza Studios por la producción. Acá no se ve, pero tenemos unas luces, cámaras, todos los chiches.
Sí.
Gracias a la Cerva también acá, el Presi está presente. Gracias a la Cerva le tenemos los invitados, ¿verdad? Con
Sí,
el apoyo de la
de
Cerva
lujo.
pueden estar acá. Gracias a la nieta de Tata también que siempre nos pone la comida. Y
Gracias a Hop que auspició toda la birra también esta noche.
También. Nos despedimos de nuestro invitado formalmente porque estamos hablando solo.
le dejamos.
So yeah, our quick closure, and thank you guys for being here. It's a real honor. We also don't bullshit a lot. It's like I said to Alvaro quickly in Spanish. I'm nervous because I'm having 2 beer icons here, and we're new at this of doing this sort of interviews. So I hope the people on the other side, enjoy the questions and also your response of everything. And thank you guys.
We have a friend
thank
that's a beer. He's a beer judge beer journalist, but he's trying to become a world expert in papas fritas.
In papas fritas?
So we need to try Paraguayan papas fritas to give him a report.
Okay, maybe from 2 or 3 places so you can start like a quick comparison of all the papas fritas. We're gonna order now some papas fritas. Sí. Papa frita.
Huh?
Or Belgian fries. There's a debate on whether it's French or Belgian. And thank you, Dick, also for...
Well, thank you for having us. This has been fun.
You guys doing great. Keep it up.
Thank you. Hope
Thank
this
you.
is the first of many visits. And thank you, Amy, also, which is over there waiting for us.
Cheers.
Okay, cheers.
Gracias.
Cheers.
Gracias, Joseca. Gracias, hasta luego. Chao, chao.
Don't take no rhythm, don't take no style. You got a thirst for killing, grab your body. Woo! Put your right hand out, give a firm handshake. Talk to me about that one big break. Spread your ear pollution both far and wide. Keep your contributions by your side. And strongly, strongly could be a winner, boy, and move quite well. Strongly, 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 strongly. You got your number down. Say you're a winner, man, you're just a sinner now. Put your left foot out, keep it all in place. Work your way right into my face. First you try to bend me, you make my backbone slide.